Human trafficking affects over 40 million people worldwide. Most of the victims are women who are sold into sex, labour and domestic work.
I even had a foster mother who ended up re-trafficking me.
On this show, we talk about the problem here in America and how it's being regulated.
I experienced sexual assault when I was in middle school.
Also on this episode of The Square, violence against women affects 1 in 3, but are issues affecting women being talked about enough? We talk to women who are taking matters into their own hands. The Square starts now. Welcome to Times Square. I'm Sally Ayhan. On this show, we talk about the difficult issues affecting people every day. And we want to get your thoughts. You can get in touch on Twitter and Facebook at TRT World and let us know about how these topics affect you. Now this week, there will be events worldwide to mark International Women's Day on March the 8th. So on this show, we'll be focusing on violence and abuse against women. Human traffickers generate hundreds of billions of dollars by trapping people in horrific situations. Traffickers use manipulative tactics that involve violence and deception to force people to engage in commercial sex or to provide labour and services against their will. First, let's hear from a woman who was trafficked from Cameroon as a young girl under the promise of education and money to help her family.
I was 9 years old. I just thought that there was a woman that was going to adopt me and I was going to come, be educated, just do, be successful financially and also help my family members. I had no room. I slept on the floor. I was cooking and cleaning, taking care of 2 kids, still no school. She was very physically and emotionally abusive. And my cousin saw the abuse that I was going through. She saw that I was close to death. My cousin was like, we have to get you out of here or you're gonna die, because I wasn't eating. So we escaped. My cousin took me to my aunt. She just left me with my aunt. My aunt saw that I was mentally not okay, but she herself took advantage of the situation. One of my punishment when I was with my trafficker was standing up from like 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. Standing up, literally, no sleep. This is not the Cosby Show. This was not the Fresh Prince or 90210. This is not the America. And if this is really how America is, I didn't want to be here. I have escaped domestic servitude. I am placed into foster care. And I get to learn about sex trafficking. For me, I just want an education.
A remarkable story there. So let's get more information about the problem. With me in the studio is Anita Tika, Senior Director of the Anti-Trafficking Program at Safe Horizon, and Abigail Swenstein, an attorney at the Legal Aid Society. Thanks for joining us on The Square.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's focus on labour trafficking here, a very powerful example there. Tell us more about human trafficking and how people become victims.
So labor trafficking is very, very complicated. It happens everywhere in every industry, every city, every town in the United States and abroad. But it's not really identified. So in terms of how individuals are labor trafficked into particular industries, it really depends on the industry that we're talking about. So we've got, for the anti-trafficking program at Safe Horizon, most if not all of our labor traffic clients are foreign nationals who came in predominantly with a visa. And so this means that in their home countries of origin, they were looking for different economic opportunities to migrate to the US to earn money to send home to their families and build a better life for themselves. So they were working with recruiters or with other third-party agencies to connect to really viable and sustainable, healthy job opportunities here in the US. And certain promises were made regarding labor, regarding the type of work, the hours they would work, the money that they would make, the conditions in which they would work. And when they get here, it's a very different story.
Okay, so obviously Evelyn there was trafficked as a child, but there must be examples of adults that are trafficked. How do you differentiate in the legal system, particularly between those who are perhaps working illegally or undocumented migrants working versus someone who is trafficked?
So in order for someone to be considered trafficked legally, they have to be compelled into the work that they're doing through force, fraud, or coercion. That is a summarization of our federal anti-trafficking statute. So that means the plain meaning of force and coercion. And they have no choice about the circumstance. There's quite often violence, there's deception, fraud, so it's very different.
So how do you catch these human traffickers?
So if you have somebody who's been labor trafficked in a restaurant or in a hospitality venue or in somebody's private home as a domestic worker, on the face of it, that work is legal. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to identify on the face of it that this person is doing something voluntarily or they're doing it under a trafficking regime, i.e., as Abby was saying, through force, fraud, or coercion. And so this is really where community education and outreach is incredibly important to educate folks in terms of this is what trafficking is. If there is force, fraud, or coercion, it rises to the level of trafficking, and it is a legal activity in the US.
How do these victims come forward though? And is there enough support for them when they do come out?
There's a number of different ways that we have received our clients. Given that for our foreign national clients and when we're looking at related immigration issues, things can be very fraught right now. There's a really pervasive climate of fear right now, especially if individuals are undocumented, and having them come forward to report crimes because they're also outing themselves as individuals who are undocumented, and that's a vulnerable place to be. So we get a lot of our clients through other client referrals, so that trust relationship has already been built between our staff and existing clients, and those clients will go back to their workplaces or to their social networks and say, Safe Horizon helped me, you can go and trust them, or any other service provider that they've been able to get help from.
Okay, let me just pause the conversation there just for a moment. Now, let's move to focus to victims of human trafficking, who are actually US citizens. Let's hear from Melanie Thompson, who was trapped into the sex trade as a young girl.
I'm originally from Queens, New York, and when I was 12 years old, I was kidnapped on the way home from a movie theater. And I was with my two best girlfriends in 6th grade, and we ran into these boys after the movies that we knew from our middle school, but they were a little bit older than we were. And I remember blacking out, and when I woke up, I remember being raped by one of those boys, and my 2 girlfriends were gone. The other boy that was there with us was gone too. And I remember when I was trying to find my clothes, the boy who was raping me had left the room. And I remember trying to run out of the house as fast as possible. But when I was running up the stairs, the door flung open, and that same boy was coming downstairs with an older man who said that I wasn't going anywhere. So it was through my time in foster care that I've relapsed and met people along the way who have also been in prostitution and was easily influenced back into it. You know, being a person of color and being marginalized and coming from really poor neighborhoods where when you walk outside of the door, the streets are nothing but this, you know, drugs, prostitution, gang banging, things of that nature. So when I walked outside, it wasn't like I was coming back into a community that was, I guess, welcoming and embracing and saying, hey, let me help you.
Quite powerful stuff. I think for a lot of people, when they think about human trafficking, they link it to an international movement of migrants. But here we have a local US citizen, a Queens girl. How common is this in the US?
A fair number of our sex traffic clients are domestic citizens. We've been seeing actually an uptick in the number of USCs that we have coming through our doors, and they are primarily sex trafficked. And so I think there's a real misconception that we see time and time again when we do our trainings in the community. We do community education and outreach to all different types of immigrant and other types of communities, and people are shocked that you can be born, bred, and trafficked in Brooklyn. You can be trafficked within your own home, never having left your home.
So how does it happen on a local level? Do people get drawn in online? Is there a social media element?
A number of our clients actually entered the trafficking situation from a romantic partnership with the person who ultimately turned out to be their trafficker. And so you can have cases of kidnap and force being used immediately, but a number of our clients entered the trafficking situation in honestly a much more insidious way, where an individual comes to them, and individuals who are traffickers know who they're targeting. They're targeting very vulnerable individuals who don't have a social support safety network, who might be LGBTQ self-identified and have been rejected by friends and family for that status, for the orientation status, or for a number of other different reasons and factors in their life. And so they will know exactly who they're going after. They will groom that person, they will form a romantic relationship with that person, and that will develop over time. So by the time the trafficker then turns to their partner and says, you know, I need a little money, can you please do this commercial sexual activity? It'll be a one-time thing. I just need some money to help pay the rent. Or I've given you, you know, X number of money over the last 5 months as I've tried to support you, I really need you to pay me back. And so because you have this romantic relationship, you have this traumatic bonding now between the human trafficking victim and the trafficker, and it becomes very, very difficult to escape that dynamic.
The power and that vulnerability, I can imagine.
Correct.
And Abigail, back to you for a moment. When listening to Melanie there, she talked about how, in her words, she engaged in prostitution. Where does the difference lie between sex trafficking and the criminality of prostitution? It seems like a really ambiguous thing. Can you just break that down for us?
Both trafficked people and non-trafficked people engage in prostitution and are arrested for prostitution. Trafficking is how you get into the circumstance, how you become someone who is working in prostitution. We at the Legal Aid Society, in my project, we represent people that are in prostitution from choice, circumstance, or coercion. So when someone realizes that the best way to survive in this absolutely economically precarious city, or there's so few resources for people living in poverty, when they weigh their choices and their circumstances and decide independently that sex work is the best way for them to survive and keep their head above water, then that would be considered prostitution and they could be criminalized for that survival. But where someone is not making that choice, where someone else is making the choice for them, where there's force or fraud or coercion, that's when it becomes trafficking. Unfortunately, when someone is engaging in prostitution on the street or in a hotel or in a massage parlor, that consideration is not made. People are arrested and then questions are asked later. I have had countless clients tell me that after they are arrested and are in handcuffs, police officers ask them, "Are you being trafficked? Who is your pimp?"
So does that make it difficult for victims to come forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much distrust of law enforcement in general amongst people living in poverty, people of color, and then once you're in handcuffs, after you've been arrested by someone who's an undercover officer pretending to be someone who's about to have sex with you, and then you're arrested, and then you're asked if you're being trafficked, there's very little trust there.
So is prostitution part of the problem? Do you want to see it decriminalised?
Absolutely. I think all forms of sex work should be decriminalized. I support broad decriminalization, both of people that are engaging in prostitution, but also people that are patronizing.
What about you, Anita? Do you want the same thing?
We have a more nuanced position. So I do have sex traffic clients who now do sex work, either because they have a very limited skill set, either they didn't have access to education during the time that they were being sex trafficked, and so they don't have the viable skills that would make them competitive in the marketplace. And so they turn to sex work in order to make ends meet and pay rent and whatnot. And so if that is the type of work that they choose to do in order to create a sustainable livelihood, then we support their agency and their choice in doing so. But again, as Abby was saying, if there is force, fraud, or coercion present, then that is trafficking, and that is an entirely different sphere that we are talking about. And so we would continue to work with them as a trafficking survivor.
What would you say to those people that consider prostitution as a crime?
I would say that they should spend some time with people that have engaged in sex work and really talk to them about what their experiences have been. I mean, once you have a criminal record, whether you're trafficked or not, once you have a criminal record, it's so hard to leave sex work.
There was a reason why it was criminalised, though. So what would you say to that?
Well, I think a lot of that relates to puritanical ideals. I mean, I think an ownership and control over women's bodies, frankly. I mean, we usually see the bulk of these laws, these regulatory laws, relate to women's bodies, right? And so I think it's a system saying what women can and can't do with their bodies.
Okay, Abigail, Anita, thank you very much for joining us in the square and breaking down this very troubling and complex issue.
Thank you.
Now, the figures for violence against women are startling. 1 in 3 women globally experience violence at some time in their life. Here in New York, there are some women who've taken their safety into their own hands. I went to Harlem to find out more. Primary school teacher Sonia Lamanakis is a world champion boxer. Her success began out of self-defence when she was robbed at knife point. She's also a trainer, and I've come to the women's world of boxing to get some tips.
Sonia, how's it going?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for
Sonia.
having me. Nice to see you, Shelly. Yeah. Look at this place. This is amazing.
All right.
It's great. What a great community of people.
Women's only gym.
Yeah.
Best thing about it.
So this is where the magic happens.
That's right. You want to take off your jacket?
Yes, let's go.
One, two.
All right.
1, 2.
So I want to know, Sonia, you've come to boxing from a pretty horrific experience. Tell me about what brought you to boxing.
Well, when I was 27, I was at the ATM late one night in Springfield, Mass, where I went to college, and I made a stupid mistake, and I went to the ATM. It was like 9:30 at night, and I was getting out of my car, and someone jumped in the back seat of my car and put my head to the back of the headrest and put a knife to my throat and took what I had in the car, which was only $60. So a few days later, I went to the gym I was training at, and I told my friend what happened, and she's like, oh, you should learn to box. Boxing would be great for you. And that's how I started my journey.
So what advice would you give me if I was attacked in the same way that you were attacked?
Well, as a woman, not being a boxer, I would recommend that you would, first start by, if you have your hands free, to take your 2 fingers and poke them as hard as you can in the person's eyes, whether, if it's a man, woman, whoever's attacking you, as hard as you can in the eyes, and that can be really painful. Also, men are usually expecting you to kick them in the crotch, and I would recommend that you would kick them in the shin because it's very painful and it would hurt even, just as much, if not more.
Yeah.
And also, another thing, if you're ever getting choked, you always bite. And the bite can be very painful, and they'll release from the bite.
Okay.
So those are the 3 moves that I teach, women when they're learning self-defense and how to defend themselves, because the normal stuff doesn't always work.
All right. I'll give that a go.
Yeah.
Fingers, chin,
Yeah.
bite.
Bite. That's right.
I can do it. I thought we'd take some time now to look at the complexities around violence against women. I'm joined by 3 women now who have some unique insight into the subject matter. Reese Scott, the owner of this gym and also a personal trainer. One of her fighters here as well, Takira Madden. She's written a book about her experience. And also Sylvia Dukovic. She's a psychotherapist and also founder and president of Critical Therapy, a centre that helps people recovering from trauma and PTSD. So, Reese, let's start with you. You have this incredible gym, plenty of women here. Yes. How many of these women come for self-defense classes?
Quite a few of them come for self-defense classes. The majority of them have experienced the boxing fitness, and they realize that they're not learning anything, and unfortunately quite a few of them have been assaulted, so they come to learn about boxing is a form of self-defense, so they actually come to learn how to defend themselves. Boxing, it also helps build your confidence. It helps build your self-esteem. You carry yourself in a different way when you know some form of self-defense.
Is there a different way of approaching a woman who has come here just to enjoy boxing and a woman who's come here to actually learn to defend herself?
When I know the background, when I know a little bit of the history, I definitely move a lot slower in training. The emphasis is definitely on the balance and just, giving examples of the life in the boxing metaphors and how important it is to maintain that balance. As far as my movements, as their coach, I do not make any sudden movements. I make sure I talk slowly, I explain everything to them, and I work according to how they feel and where they are, their comfort level. And I've been doing this a long time, so I can see that and I can feel it and I can read them very well. I always ask, how you feeling? How you feeling? And I'll ask them many times because I need to know where they are. Sometimes you have to be very, very careful. Certain things that you say, they may be triggers.
So Takira, listening to that now, does that resonate with you? When you came to this gym for self-defense classes, what were you seeking and did that approach help?
Absolutely. I don't even know what I was exactly looking for when I walked in the doors for the first time, but once I began training, I realized it was to find that balance and to find that center of gravity and confidence that Coach Reese is talking about. I experienced sexual assault when I was in middle school, when I was quite young, which later became a stalking case as an adult. And I've just been kind of in the state of being lost until I came in through these doors and realized what it felt like to actually stand my ground and feel confident in my stance and find that balance again. And that focus of training has been enormously helpful for me.
Sylvia, let's move on to you. You've dealt with a lot of women in your work in terms of people that are recovering from violent experiences. How would you say the US compares to the rest of the world in the way that women experience violence?
The Thomas Reiter Foundation released a study last year, and they ranked safety for women in different countries. The most unsafe country in the world was India as #1. Unfortunately, the US was number 10. Now, what's also interesting is that when we talk about violence against women and attacks on women, actually a third of them happen by strangers or someone that we don't know. 3/4 of them are unfortunately done in our homes by partners, and we're really talking about domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And I think that is one of the reasons why most women don't, it goes underreported. It's complicated because it deals with people that we care about and also inflict the greatest physical pain.
So here we're obviously talking about a situation where women are coming here to be physically strong and to potentially feel like that they could defend themselves in the street if they had to. But if a woman's dealing with domestic violence, how do they take that home? I mean, do they fight back to their partner who might be abusing them?
One of the things we tell, that I tell my patients is you don't fight back because you don't know how that's going to end. Abusers are insidious, their tactics are sort of frightening, so you don't want to escalate the abuse. However, I do think that learning self-defense is important, and it's important because of something that you both talked about. It's about regaining a sense of yourself, it's about reclaiming your body, and it's about learning to sort of feel your power in a very somatic way. It's not just psychological, but also somatic. And it's also learning to be with another. One of the things you've talked about so beautifully is that when people come in, and especially if they've been a victim of assault, is you actually feel where they're at. You have a conversation with them. So for the first time in their life, maybe they actually feel like someone is there. They're sharing space in a very different and collaborative way.
So Takira, what about when you came out to the authorities? Did you find it difficult to tell your story? Did you feel that you would be believed?
Once the abuser from the SA came forward against me and it became a legal ordeal, that was scary, to suddenly have to try to prove myself for something that happened 18 years ago in my life. So of course it's scary. It's scary to relive that. It's scary, again, knowing that the law and systematically things are against us in so many ways.
Sylvia, do you find that when you're talking to your clients that some of that trauma is revisited when they have to face authorities to talk about their issues? Can you give us a bit of insight into that?
Most people who suffer from violent attacks suffer from PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that you feel as if you're reliving the trauma in the moment. So every time someone has asked you about what happened and how did it happen, you're actually triggered. What's really unfortunate about the law enforcement, including the legal system, is that it has very low tolerance for how psychology works. The fact that memory is not linear, especially traumatic memory, it comes and goes. Because sometimes these very aggressive and very painful acts are so traumatic that to remember them is actually painful physiologically and mentally. So as I often tell my patients, especially if you have been attacked or if you've suffered from sexual assault, is you might not remember all the details right away, but that's your brain protecting you from actually the trauma of reliving them. And I don't think we've done a great job educating the jury, for example, about the process. So you have people who sit on a jury listening to a case and they may not understand what is happening. They may feel, well, if she doesn't remember, maybe it didn't happen that way, or how do we know what actually happened?
Reese, you're someone that came from a pretty interesting story yourself. You've been training for a long time and you're clearly very successful at what you do. Outside of the physical strength that you gain from this sport, what kind of inner strength do you gain that you pass on to your trainers?
I've learned so many just life lessons through this sport. One is really what I just encourage everyone to do is to use their voice, stand up for yourself, stand up, speak, make no apologies. Women apologize for everything. everything. Why are we so sorry? We don't need to be sorry. This is my space. I talk a lot about space. It's very, very important. This is my space. I tell women to practice their man spread every day. You leave the house, you're on the train, you're on the subway, practice your man spread and feel comfortable claiming that space, because in that space is your balance. In that space is your room. It's your space to breathe and figure out what move you want to make next, not to be in a position where you're allowing someone else to make decisions for you.
Well, that's all we have time for on this show. If you have any thoughts or comments on the issues we've discussed, you can get in touch with us on Twitter and also on Facebook at TRT World. Thanks to our team here in New York, and please join us next time here on The Square.